Hello, you're watching the Wild Monday Collective webinar series for people tackling the impact of stress on performance at team or organisational level. This series is a practical and honest human approach to some of the biggest issues facing our workplaces. Today, Dr. Rachel Morris and I are talking about how to address a workplace and culture that can create stressed people. And for all the good work being done on employee wellbeing, there remains that elephant in the room that often the systems and processes of the organisation itself, its leadership team, external pressures like Brexit, a changing market, all of these things can massively impact on people's stress. And it can feel impossible for a manager or a team leader, or indeed a head of wellbeing, to change any of those things. So Rachel, firstly, hello.
Hi, Carrie. Great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
So Rachel, in the light of these big organisational changes, what can we do?
Okay, so what I'm going to do in this webinar is talk about the tangible things that we can do as organisations, as individuals and as managers to create a real culture that's empowering people, that's helping people with resilience, that's reducing stress. So I think it's probably important, first of all, to have a look at why our best efforts are failing at the moment. Because for those of you that don't know me, my background is as a GP, and I've also worked for several years at Cambridge University teaching medical students how to have good professional skills like resilience and teamwork. But as a GP, I was noticing that I was having to sign a lot of people off work with things that actually as a GP I couldn't do anything about. And I remember a patient who came to see me. It was a middle-aged man. It was the end of my surgery. He sat down and he said, "Doctor, you've just got to send me to see a psychiatrist." And I thought, oh crumbs, what's going on? Why does he need a psychiatrist? He burst into tears and I thought, okay, right, so tell me about what's going on. And he wasn't someone that came in very often. I'd never met him before. And the story unfolded, and he was on the board of a large company in London, and he was having to make, a lot of changes in the company. So there was a lot of change going on, a lot of uncertainty. Added to the story is the fact that his mother had become extremely unwell. His father had died a couple of years ago, and he was having to go and visit his mother sort of 3 or 4 times a week. She lived 2 hours drive away, so he was having to make this sort of 4-hour round trip 3 or 4 times a week. So having spoken to him and sort of screened him for depression, I thought to myself, you know what? I don't think you're depressed. I don't think you have a mental health disorder. I think you're just running on empty. You've got nothing left in the tank to give. And you've got all this stress, you've got all these things going on, but you're not doing anything to replenish yourself. And actually nothing that I could prescribe would help this, that he needed some help to make the changes that he needed to. But then I looked around and a lot of my colleagues were the same. A lot of GPs in the NHS, there's a lot of organisational stress. And having been teaching at the medical school and working a lot in hospitals, I saw that a lot of my consultant colleagues were under the same sorts of pressure. And I think the problem with clever people in high stress organisations is they think they're absolutely superhuman, but they're really, really not. And under increasing pressure, what's our response? We just work hard and harder and harder. And unfortunately, this is just counterproductive or downright dangerous. And the evidence is in the UK that we're working harder and harder than ever, but productivity is down by 16% an hour. And so if we're working harder and harder, why hasn't our productivity gone up? So I just wanted to show you the stress curve. Carrie, have you seen this one before? The Yerkes-Dodson curve, the stress arousal curve, otherwise known as?
I have. Talk us through it.
So this was developed years and years ago, and it's a basic graph to show what happens to our performance under pressure. So basically, human beings need a little bit of pressure to perform. So you can always think about teenage boys who sit on the sofa all day and get absolutely nothing done. So as the pressure increases, your performance goes up. I know that I personally need some quite tight deadlines for me to get the work done. So pressure, a little bit of pressure and stress is good for you. And you get to this point where you've just reached peak performance with peak pressure. The problem is that our performance starts to go down with increasing pressure. I mean, it would be absolutely wonderful if our performance just went up in a linear way, but it doesn't. So with increasing pressure, our performance just starts to drop off the top of the curve, and then it actually drops really quite fast. And if you get to extreme, you might be actually getting quite unwell with it.
And Rachel, when you talk to people in the organisations you work with, if you ask them to plot themselves on there, where would most people put themselves?
It's really interesting. So when I do workshops, I say to people, can you rate yourself on this curve, or can you rate your colleagues on this curve? It's a little bit less personal. And most of them rate themselves just going to the right of the top, or rate their colleagues just going to the right of the top. And whenever I'm in a workshop, quite a high proportion say they think there are some people that are quite far to the right of that curve.
Gosh.
So it does seem to be an endemic problem. And I think that by the time people start rating themselves as just slipping off the top, they're probably quite a long way down as well. And this is a huge problem in our organisations. So 12.5 million days are lost annually due to absenteeism. That's sickness and being off with stress and associated problems. But there's an even bigger problem with presenteeism. So that's being at work but not really functioning due to ill health, and that's mainly due to stress. This is costing £15.1 billion a year, so it's a huge problem. And we all are really at risk of burnout, because actually, even if we enjoy our jobs, we're still not immune. So even if you're really engaged, actually 1 in 5 of employees are at high risk of burnout. And burnout is a sort of severe stress response where life doesn't seem to be worth living, you lose hope, you lose joy in your life, nothing seems to be worthwhile. And if you're at the stage of burnout, then you really need to go and get some professional help. Go see your GP, seek advice, seek some help. The good news is that there is evidence that appropriate workplace health initiatives do give a return on investment, and I emphasise the word appropriate. So it's really worth getting right. And I think particularly with health and well-being is just the foundation of good performance. But I've seen so many resilience and stress reduction initiatives which are just a waste of time and just scratch the surface of what's needed. So I think it's worth asking the question, do these initiatives really work? Well, there was an interesting report about 10 years ago, and that looked at all sorts of wellness programs ranging from sort of health advice, back pain advice, say smoking cessation advice, and they also looked at other sort of stress reduction type wellness programs. And they looked at, did these programs actually have an effect? Were they effective? And actually over 80% of them did reduce sickness absence, which I think is great. But actually, if you look down this chart, you'll see that only 30 of them reduced staff turnover. And if you go even further down, around about 15% of these wellness programs increase productivity, and only 15% increase health and welfare in the organisation. So some of these wellness programs that we're putting in to try and increase well-being and reduce stress and help with resilience aren't really being very effective, apart from perhaps reducing a little bit of sickness. They don't help the other stuff. And I'm not particularly surprised. I've been going into organisations over the last couple of years and, helping them with resilience and reducing stress and well-being. And there's an awful lot of stuff that doesn't really work. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the 3 main problems, I think, with some of these resilience interventions, these things that are designed to reduce stress. Well, firstly, is they're superficial. So rather like someone who's fallen off their bike and broken their leg, but also got a graze on the top of the knee, I think putting in some sort of superficial well-being or resilience interventions are rather like putting a sticky plaster on a broken leg. You're sort of treating the symptom of the cut there, but you're not curing the problem, you're not treating the cause, and you're just treating a few of the symptoms. So you can get sort of talks on sleeping to help with insomnia, and the odd mindfulness session at lunchtime to reduce anxiety perhaps, or maybe a free gym and an alcohol awareness session. And these are all absolutely brilliant things, but they don't particularly deal with the root problem. Also, different people need different things, and it's really great having some fitness facilities at work. What happens if you're working part-time and you live a long way from the office, and actually every single minute you're in the office, you need to be at your desk or talking to your team? It's going to be very difficult to go to the gym. So you might need to do something else in terms of exercise. So one size doesn't fit all. I think also sometimes if you miss time and misplace your interventions, they can make people really, really cynical. I have a colleague who's a teacher, and on one of their training days, they were asked to do some mindful painting. The problem is they just had their budget slashed, and she had to rewrite her timetable and work out how on earth she was going to fit in all the work that she had to do. For example, some of the nurses at a local hospital were given an option for a free sort of meditation session at lunchtime. This was in their lunch break, and or they had to stay on later at work, and they were already short-staffed and overstretched, and there was no one to care for the patients if they weren't there on the wards. Or, for example, you might have some perks. I mean, employees given, say, discounts for restaurants or boxes of wine when sometimes their salaries are so low that they're having to work overtime and having to work extra jobs. Just to make it ends meet. And then you find that people are leaving the workplace for higher paid jobs, and you've got this constant churn of people going, and that puts stress on the organisation because you're having to retrain, etc., etc. So there's all sorts of things that you can do that maybe are just treating the symptoms but aren't really treating the real problem, because I think some of the lunchtime sessions perhaps are supposed to make you feel like this when actually you're feeling like this.
I guess I can see why organisations want to do something to address a problem, and how putting on a lunch and learn session or providing some vouchers is much easier than trying to address some of the more systemic leadership and cultural issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that these things are wrong, and I think it's absolutely great if they're there. But my concern is that they make organisations feel that they've done the resilience thing, they've ticked the box and they don't have to do anything else. Because the problem with just providing educational sessions is that they're ineffective. We all know what to do for wellbeing, right? But it's getting the time to do it. So when you get more and more work, what do? You just work harder and harder and harder. And often the thing that you stop doing when the work gets too much is that thing that really, really invigorates you and re-energizes you. So when the workload gets too much for me, I sometimes stop going to the gym, I stop seeing my friends for coffee, I eat fast food, etc., etc. It's not that I don't know what to do. So again, I had a patient that came to see me who had a nasty accident, sprained his ankle, signed him off sick, and then I referred him to the physio, and he came back a couple of weeks later, and I said, well, you know, how's your ankle? He said, oh, it's absolutely no better, it's still really bad. And I said, okay, well, what did the physio say? Oh, she said, the physio was brilliant. She gave me these exercises to do. Not only that, she emailed me with some videos of the exercises. I said, well, that's great, how are they going? He said, oh, I haven't done them, of course. So, you know, we know what to do. Behaviour change is really, really difficult. And this was really brought home to me. One of my other roles is running some leadership courses for GPs, and I regularly lecture to GPs on resilience and well-being. And a colleague of mine who attended one of these talks said to me that she had sat there with tears running down her face during the talk about well-being. She's a GP herself, because she realised how far she'd gone down the route towards burnout, and how she wasn't looking after herself and she wasn't paying any attention. And she's a GP. We're the people that are telling people about this, telling people how to do it. So why aren't we doing it ourselves? Well, often it's due to workload, it's due to time. We don't have enough time to do it. But behaviour change is different. It's difficult, and it takes so much more than education, it takes so much more than willpower. You know, we need help to change our habits and our behaviours out. We need motivation, we need accountability, we need to produce new habits, and we need support. So I think just putting on an educational session without any support or other interventions to help change behaviour can, you know, whilst is really, really good, it may help a little bit, but it's not hugely effective. And these superficial, ineffective approaches have been described as a fruit and bicycle approach. And like I say, my concern is that organisations do these superficial things and they know that they've ticked the box of well-being and stress reduction. And then they're absolved of all responsibility. Because I think the third problem, and I think this gets to the real heart of the issue, is that many of these sort of resilience interventions don't address the toxic workplace that people find themselves working in. And this, I think is the real root of the problem. So I had another patient, she had really bad allergic asthma and we just couldn't get control of it. And eventually I said to her, well, how are you using your inhaler? And she said, oh, well, I use it like this. And she just started spraying it around the room and then started sniffing it like it was perfume. So not only was the inhaler particularly ineffective, but it then turned out she spent all day sitting next to her partner who smoked 60 cigarettes a day. She had 3 cats and a budgie. She was in an environment that was not helping her asthma. So even if we had got the inhaler technique right, it wasn't going to cure her. It wasn't going to treat her symptoms of asthma. She was never going to get better when she's in that environment. Because you can make your people, you can help them become as well and as resilient as you like, which is probably the equivalent of spraying an inhaler into the room if you keep them in a toxic workplace still. So I think for high performance, for real resilience, you need personal resilience and individual resilience, but you also need to have a really good workplace that empowers you. The problem is, even if you're a really resilient person and you're really well and you pay attention to your well-being and you've been upskilled in things like time management and dealing with conflicts, if you're working in a really bad workplace with a toxic culture, you're either going to leave or you're worse, going to really burn out. Does that make sense?
It does. I love this slide, and I think this. Everyone, screenshot this. This is part of your armoury as you make a case for changing the way you handle your workplace culture to those who can make that change. Grab it now.
Yeah. So I once had another patient. She came in, she said, oh, doctor, can you sign me off sick with stress? And I said, well, okay, what's going on at your work? And she said, well, I really hate the person I sit next to. They're really difficult. And I said, I'm not signing you off because of that. But then I thought about it, and she'd spoken to her manager about it, and they hadn't done anything. And she was sitting next to this really difficult person, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It was having a huge impact on her well-being, her enjoyment of her job and everything like that. So I realised that actually workplace is really, really serious. And I think sometimes we think that if someone isn't well or hasn't been looking after themselves properly, that can then cause them to have low performance or maybe cause them to have stress. But actually, I think we get this the wrong way around. I think that bad workplace is often the cause of the problem. So if you look at stress, depression and anxiety by the cause, you see that actually, almost half of it is caused by workplace issues, for example, workload. And so if you just talk to people about well-being without helping them manage their time and workload, you're not going to help very much. And I've just seen a figure that's actually having stress, anxiety or depression costs over £1,000 per employee. And 1 in 6 of us are experiencing this at any one time. And you can have all these health interventions. You can give people drugs. You can have employee assistance programs. You can provide CBT. This doesn't address the real root problem. It doesn't address the cause. And not only does a bad workplace cause stress, depression and anxiety, but it also can cause physical symptoms. And there's a really interesting study that was done about back pain, and they looked at groups of people who had back pain, and they looked at how likely they were to come back to work, and if their back pain went on to be sort of chronic back pain, or if it was likely to get better and they would be able to come back more quickly. And they looked at the factors in these people that predicted whether they'd be off long term or whether they'd get back to work quickly. And if you were to have a guess, Carrie, what would those things be?
Well, I don't know. Poor PC setup. So bad chair, sitting down all day, looking at a screen.
Yeah, those sorts of things, or maybe sort of mental health state, or how active you were. Actually, the top 3 things that predicted whether you'd be off long term or not were lack of decision control, lack of empowering leadership and lack of fair leadership at work.
I find that extraordinary, the idea that back pain as a physical symptom so many people experience is directly linked to a sense of autonomy at work. I find that completely extraordinary.
Yeah, so control is absolutely key here, and having leaderships that empower you and give you control, and an organisation that listens to you and is fair is really, really important. And it's not just back pain that's caused by bad workplace. You know, stress, depression and anxiety caused by bad workplace can exhibit as all sorts of physical symptoms. And actually, in general practice, 50% of the patients we see have medically unexplained symptoms. And a lot of these symptoms, very physical symptoms, you know, abdominal pain, migraines, all those sorts of things, are caused by stress. And Dame Carol Black, who is the workplace advisor to the government about workplace health, she's said that actually we should be writing bad workplace on a lot more sick notes than we do.
And given that, you know, you're revealing with such interesting anecdotes and data that our stress is so linked to the workplace in which we operate, and some factors far beyond what would feel to be under the control of a manager, or certainly of an individual, or even of somebody responsible for people and well-being. So what can we do?
What can we do about it? Well, brilliant. We're on to the bit where we talk about what can we do about it. I think there are lots of different strategies that we can do about it. I think the bad news is that there is no easy fix and there's no easy answer. Okay? The good news is that there are lots of things that we need to do, but it takes a bit of effort, and it takes a whole cultural change, really. What I did was trained up as an executive coach and a team coach to be able to help people change their behaviour. And I, you know, learned through trial and error, through going into organisations, doing sessions on wellbeing, that actually people needed more than just wellbeing. They needed training in how to deal with conflict. They needed to be upskilled in how to manage their time. They needed to be empowered to have those conversations that they needed to have. And I think at the heart of it, it's about raising awareness and raising self-awareness and developing a good culture throughout the whole organisation. Because we can deal with stress in these are the sort of strategies in which we can deal with stress. So stressful things happen. Whether we find them stressful or not depends entirely on our response. So if things are constantly happening but we're responding well, then we're not going to have any symptoms of stress. But if things happen to us and we're constantly responding in a negative way, then we will go on to have those symptoms of stress. So for example, if you were to tell me today that I had to suddenly write a business case for something in half an hour's time, I would get very stressed because I don't have the time to do that today. But if I had a whole afternoon free and I could write it, that wouldn't cause me stress. So this is how we deal with these things on these different levels. So firstly, we can deal with the symptoms of stress. So those are the things that we've been talking about: the back pain, the migraines, the symptoms of anxiety, the physical, the emotional symptoms. I'm a GP. I like to work a little bit higher than this because, you know, we deal with people with symptoms of stress all the time. And I think it's a little bit late. I think by the time people are really having symptoms such as insomnia, anxiety, tiredness, they probably need to take some, or at least step back and really have a look at what's going on. And they may need to take some time out. You also need to then help people change their response to the stressful things that are happening. And there's lots of work you can do with people about how they're perceiving things, how they can then manage their inner chimp and get themselves out of this sort of fight or flight zone that they get themselves into. And then finally, I like to work at this higher level, which is to actually prevent these things from happening in the first place. And there's a few things you can do with this. So firstly, you can upskill people. So you can help them to manage their time and prioritize their work better. You can teach them to have really good conversations with each other and their teams. You can help people be well, so you can help with the well-being and the healthy choices. You can also help them make good choices and set boundaries and work out, you know, what they're going to say no to. the organisation also has a responsibility to empower your people to make good choices, to be able to prioritise. And the organisation also needs to look at the causes of the stress and change those processes and those really irritating things that are causing a lot of the stress in the first place. So I'm just going to talk through those in a little bit more detail. Is there anything unclear at this point, Carrie?
So my burning question is, how do you, so when people are experiencing stress and they feel that the organisation is should be entirely working at that higher level, so preventing things that cause me stress, and are fairly resistant to hearing about hearing that they should change their response, that they should learn a new skill to help them respond to the bad thing they feel is happening to them, and can you help us kind of understand the relationship between those? So if you were to work with an organisation, how would you kind of link all these things together so that the response one is not just rejected outright as a misfire?
So I think this is all about making sure that this is all the way through an organisation, that people don't just think, oh, well, they're having to give us this program because it's so flipping awful working here, that, you know, they're having to put all these things
yeah.
in. Show that the organisation are taking it really seriously. So say, not only are we helping you with some of the symptoms and the wellbeing stuff, and we're providing support for that. So, you know, employee assistance programs, great. Training up people who can act as mental health first aiders, that's really great. So actually recognising that there is a problem in the first place, and then directing their people to the different charities or the employee assistance program or their GP, or places where they can seek help for the symptoms, and saying that we are taking this seriously, and taking mental health seriously as well. So that would be the first way to sort of discourage the cynicism, but then make sure that the rest of the training you're giving gets placed throughout the whole organisation. So the teams don't feel that they're just being done to and everyone else is ignoring it, that actually the managers get trained as well, and then the senior leaders get trained too. And you start talking the language of resilience and good workplace.
Got it.
So I think, you know, that the first thing we were talking about is empowering your people and empowering your teams. And we talked about changing your response. And I think actually everyone throughout an organisation needs to understand about what happens when we feel threatened in any way, when we become hijacked by our amygdalas and we get into our fight, flight or freeze zone. And when we're in this zone, which can be caused by all sorts of things, by someone being rude, by someone sending us a difficult email, by feeling that our job's under threat, by increased workload, when we get into that zone, we are incapable of thinking straight or making good decisions or being creative. And so helping people understand just some of the neuroscience of what's going on and how to then step out of that corner where you're backed into the corner and you're feeling you've got to fight, stepping out of that and to be able to be creative, make good decisions is really, really, really important. And telling everybody about that, because I think, you know, not all leaderships have got this, not all leaders have got this nailed either. So that's one thing we can do.
And if you were to sum up the neuroscience in a couple of sentences, such that somebody on this webinar could explain it to a senior manager or put it in a proposal, how would you do that? You mentioned the amygdala. Tell us more about that.
Sorry, repeat that again.
You mentioned the amygdala. Tell us more about that.
So what happens when someone does something or something happens is that we tend to react spontaneously and immediately, rather than being able to think about what our reaction is. And the reason we do this is because we've got this ancient threat detection system called the limbic system, and the amygdala is part of that. So the amygdala detected, when we were in caves, it detected if we were about to be killed by a bear, if we were about to be thrown out of the group, because then we would die from exposure. So being liked by people is really, really important. The amygdala would also detect if you were just about to be fought by the alpha male. So the amygdala kept us safe when we're living in caves, doesn't keep us very safe now. It constantly detects threats, so you end up having the same reaction to a difficult email as if you're just about to be eaten by a bear. And we can't help this happening. It just happens 5 times faster than our rational human thinking brains. And Steve Peters has called this reaction your chimp. And he says your chimp comes out and you're then incapable of thinking rationally because you're thinking from your threats, you're thinking out of fear. And everything becomes very, very black and white.
So part of our stress response, part of one of the ways in which you advocate helping employees to manage their own response to stressful situations is learning how to handle their chimp. Is that right? Learning how to harness that natural reaction which no longer serves us in the workplace and stresses us out.
Absolutely. The first step is to actually recognise when your chimp is out. So recognise when you've been backed into the corner and you're in that zone. And once you're in that zone, there are things you can do about it. Firstly, you just got to get yourself some space, because you need to give your space. You need to give yourself time to manage your chimp when it's out, and just get yourself back into your rational thinking. So give yourself space. Some people go for a walk. Some people leave emails, reply later. If you're in a meeting, you can even get a cup of coffee and just drink it very, very slowly. Try and sort of think to yourself, how am I trying to do this? So give yourself space and time, and then interrogate reality. You know, think, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And what's actually going on? Because a lot of the time we're responding to the story in our head, not to what's actually going on. So I had a manager once that was saying, oh, my boss has really undermined me and really hacked me off. And we said, okay, so what's actually going on? Did she undermine you? Well, she sent an email to my team behind my back, but actually I wasn't there, and I think she was worried about the project. And you know what? I don't think she was undermining me. She was just being questioned by her boss and wanted to know what's going on. Oh, yeah, she wasn't undermining me. It's a completely different story now. And that just enables her to change her response. So interrogating what's actually going on, and then using your human rational thinking part of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, then to think about, how do I want to be responding to this? You know, as a decent human being, you know, respecting the other person, what would I like to choose my reaction? Once you've given yourself space and time, you've interrogated reality, and then you've decided what you're going to choose as your reaction, it's a lot easier to then make that good decision and change the response. Now, I'm saying this as if it's really simple, but it takes practice.
And it sounds like with practice, that's the kind of thing that, whilst you might not be able to stop the immediate response, you get quicker at going around that cycle before you've shot from the hip and said something you regret or done something based on that initial reaction.
Yeah, it's definitely a question of brain training, and just thinking to yourself, oh, you know, firstly, recognize it. Oh, chimp is out. I'm backed into the corner. Secondly, okay, what am I feeling now? Thirdly, what's really going on? How do I want to respond? And I find that the more I teach this through workshops and the more I do it, the more I'm just being able to catch myself and go, okay, what sort of mum do I want to be here? What sort of partner do I want to be here? What sort of colleague do I want to be here? What sort of friend do I want to be? And do it. But, you know, the great thing about our brains is they have this thing called plasticity. So we can change our brains just by changing our ways of thinking. And, you know, sometimes we need to recognize the way we are thinking. And this is where mindfulness can be quite helpful, because it helps you notice your thoughts and realize that actually your thoughts aren't you, or they might not be reality. Or CBT can also help to think, actually, what sort of warped thoughts am I getting here? What am I thinking here that's unhelpful? Like, oh, he always does this. Well, is that really true? So all these things and techniques can be helpful.
And it seems to me that if an organisation were just to do this one thing, just to give everybody some awareness of that as an internal process that's happening for them, and that will be happening for other people as well, and to give them some techniques and some practice at responding differently, I can imagine a massive reduction in the number of emails flying around that were sent out, you know, sent by people's chimps, number of things that leaders might say or do, which we know carry more weight and set the tone for other communication, that just as a single action taken by the organisation could be hugely powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. When I go through this with teams, they sort of work out how they might be triggering other people, how they're getting triggered themselves. One team even started buying little chimps and putting them on their computer so they could see when they were feeling that they'd been triggered. And it just makes you start to think to yourself, you know, if I do send that email, how is that going to be received? Is that likely to trigger someone else? You know what, it might be better to pick up the phone and have a conversation, because then I can get the body language and the tone of voice right. And I think it just helps you be aware of other people as well. So it's a massively helpful intervention. But like I said, it's good. You need to do it through the whole organisation, not just with one group of people.
I see that. Yeah. Not just with the people who are effectively at effect from the rest of the organisation. So, well, we'll keep pouring stuff on you and you just respond better, please. But if it could become something that's embedded into the whole organisation's language, a bit of organisational self-awareness, that would be incredible.
Yeah.
Okay. And what else?
So what else can you do? So firstly, help them change their response. Recognise when you've been triggered, recognise when other people have been triggered. I think empowering people to solve their own problems is really important, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. Train people to have good conversations, even just train people how to listen to each other, and create a good listening partnership. Allow people to have a voice throughout the whole organisation and get them involved at all different levels of management. And we've already talked about control and the importance of control, but give them more control over over how they need to work, and about how they can manage their workload and how they can do things. You know, the leadership might need to set a tone of what they need to do, but, you know, give people as much flexibility and control as possible. And then I think one of the first things that you can do that's really helpful is to actually train your people, help them spot signs of stress in other people, because, you know, you're much more likely to notice signs of stress in your friend than the manager is, because the manager might not be around very much. So recognize when people are starting to head towards burnout or to display some of the symptoms. And I would say, you know, if you have a colleague that's starting just to stay a bit later every day, making a few more mistakes, they're getting a bit irritable, then maybe you're noticing they're drinking much more coffee or coming in with a hangover quite a lot, then actually they might have started to slide down the vortex of busyness. Because
what is this? What is the vortex of busyness?
I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was writing a handbook for one of the courses that I teach, and I had a really short deadline. I didn't know how I was going to get it all done in time. So I started stopping my gym, stopped seeing my friends, put my children in extra childcare, working every evening, God sent, you know. And eventually I was starting to wake up really early, thinking about the work and feeling really quite anxious about it. And then I was getting quite irritable, and then I felt myself getting really tearful and really shouting at the kids. And then I realised that I just started to go down the vortex, and at the bottom is burnout. And like I said before, we often give up those things that are really important to keep us well. And how do we prevent ourselves from doing this? Well, actually, we need to pay attention to the ways to well-being. These were the 5 ways to well-being were devised by the government about sort of 5-10 years ago, and I've added another 3. And I think all these are really, really important in terms of physically, mentally, emotionally staying healthy. But I know I've already said that just giving people information doesn't lead to behaviour change. I think you need to give interventions about well-being that actually help people to change their behaviour. So one thing I do is I get people to, we do a workshop where you get people to actually think about all these different things, think about what the evidence is for them, and then think about how they could increase them in their lives. And I get them to rate themselves. So this is a set of dials. So I get people to rate themselves in each area, just to put a line there to work out where they are on the dial, with, you know, green being I'm doing really, really well, red being, oh, I'm not doing so well, amber being actually just right.
And it sounds like there are some kind of underlying belief patterns that this approach challenges. So at school, we're taught, we know we have pressure exerted on us that when we're not doing very well in our exams, or there's a big set of exams coming up, we're encouraged to work harder and harder. We're constantly encouraged as adults, imperceptibly almost, to just keep taking on more and more. And yet here you're encouraging people to set boundaries, and is that something that the organisation itself needs to really weigh in and show that is an entirely acceptable and encouraged behaviour in this business?
Yeah, I think that is really, really key, because if the organisation is expecting people to answer emails within 1 minute and to be sending emails all through the weekend, then what does that say to the employees about what the boundaries are? Often it's just recognising when you're going to go home, when you're going to start work, when you're going to turn your phone off. Because, you know, I think that the evidence is after about 10 hours of work, you're completely ineffective anyway. So you might as well just stop. But, you know, trying to increase your well-being without putting those boundaries in is almost impossible.
And it feels to me like that's more than a workshop telling people that that's okay, or the odd bit of an employee comms message that says, you know, it's good to set boundaries, because for many people they might, in their experience in their own team, feel like, well, that's all very well for us to say that as an organisation, but the reality is my boss often gives me things at 3 o'clock on a Friday with a deadline of 10 or 11 o'clock on a Monday, and the expectation is I will work through my weekend. So how would you address that in practice?
So I think when you're getting that going on, I think empowering your employees is really, really important. And, you know, employees need to speak up. I think we get this learned helplessness about the fact that we have no control and that we just have to do everything our manager says, and we can't push back or clarify or ask anything. And so one tool that I like to use in organisations is the drama triangle, and this is a really great model, and in my experience it's one thing that really helps shift people's mindsets. It was devised by Dr. Stephen Cartman, and he was a student of Eric Berne. And Eric Berne in the 1960s wrote a book called Games People Play, and people might know him from transactional analysis, so talking about adult-child interactions or parent-to-child interactions. And
I'm okay, you're okay, that kind of thing.
That's exactly it. And Stephen Cartman was his student and just took it to a slightly different level. And he talked about this game that people get stuck in. It's a drama triangle. It's a drama. You see it in drama. So you see it in fairy tales, where you have a persecutor who's the evil villain, and then you get this victim who's a damsel in distress, and you get a hero who comes and rescues the damsel in distress. And we see this being played out in organisations all the time. So, for example, you might feel that you're a victim because someone is withholding the information that you need to finish your report. And try as you might, you can't get them to give you that information. So you then go to your boss, who you think should be your rescuer, and says, can you sort out Carrie? She won't give me the information that I need. And your boss goes, yes, I'll go and sort her out. So he goes up to Carrie and says, Carrie, can you give Rachel the information? And Carrie goes, well, hang on a sec. Why are you having a go at me? They didn't tell me what I wanted. So then Carrie turns into the victim, and then I've suddenly turned into the persecutor. And then I might go, Carrie might come to me and go, oh, Rachel, why did you sort of tell your boss to do that? So, oh, well, I didn't do that. Sorry. Oh, sorry. They've been really harsh with you, haven't they? I didn't mean that at all. So I then turn into a rescuer. So can you see how we sort of move around this drama triangle all the time?
You're painting a picture of my life, Rachel.
That's the first name that came to mind. I'm sorry. You can also see this, I think, particularly with managers acting as rescuers with workload. So, for example, the workload goes up and up and up, and the team, maybe as a team member who's feeling like a real victim, just saying, I'm absolutely swamped with the workload. Manager, please, can you help me out with this? And as a good manager, I want to look after my team. So I say, yes, of course. Look, okay, I can see you're drowning in it. I'll do it for you. And that's well and good, but it happens again and again, and with lots of different members of the team. And soon, me as a manager, I'm so snowed under trying to sort everyone else's work out, I don't have any time for the one-to-ones or to support my teams in the way that they need to. And suddenly my team start complaining about me. Well, you know, she's not helping me at all, and she's never available to support me. So suddenly I've now been cast in the persecutor role, and my team still feel themselves in the victim role. But then I start to feel, well, why are they having a go at me? I was just trying to help. So I then move to the victim role, and they're moving to the persecutor role. So we just keep going rounds. Have you seen that happening, Carrie?
I have. How do you get out of that thrilling but ultimately unproductive triangle?
Yeah, well, you know, we've cast these people, we cast the victim as absolutely helpless. We cast the persecutor as really evil, and we cast the rescuer as an absolute hero. And the first step is just to realise that the victim is not helpless, and the persecutor is not evil, and the rescuer is not a hero. And we need to help them step out of the role, because you can't win if you just steep in the same role. So the victim, actually, what I suggest is they turn into an activator. So this is someone who has the resources that they need, can take control over the things that they can control, is perfectly capable of going and asking for what they need, or asking that something could be clarified, or pushing back and going, okay, that's interesting, but what should my priorities be here? The persecutor turns into a catalyst who helps things happen. So they're giving challenges, challenges at work, they're giving tasks, they're giving quests, and they catalyze things happening. They're not evil, they're giving good and proper challenges. And the rescuer, and for me this is key, instead of being the rescuer turns into a coach, someone who supports someone to solve their own problems rather than doing it all themselves. So you've got these 3 new roles, and when we go through this with teams, it's a complete mindset shift for them, because suddenly the managers start to think, okay, it's not about just doing everything for my teams, it's about empowering them and helping them and having the really good conversations. And then,
can you teach people how to be good coaches? Can you teach people to get good at stepping out of that rescuer role? And it strikes me that the rescuer role is the one that comes with the best intentions. So it comes with I want to help, I want to be part of the solution, not the problem. But it's a misjudged effort. So how do you get people to flip out of rescuer and into coach?
So it's, I think that's a really, really good point. We all feel we ought to be rescuers, and actually a lot of us in our jobs have been trained to be rescuers. So as a GP, I've been trained to give people advice. It's what I do, but really just telling someone what to do, as we've already talked about, doesn't help with behaviour change. People are much more likely to do something if they've solved their own problems and they've done it themselves. So I can train people with a very simple coaching model to be able to have those conversations. And often it's just a case of listen before you give advice, and ask people, what could you do? What solutions have you come up with yourself, before you then go and give the solution? But I think people need to be trained to be in that role rather than in the rescuer giving advice role, because we want to give advice, we want to fix things, it sort of validates our positions, it shows that we have knowledge, and we think that's being a good manager. Because most of us, when we're appointed as leaders or managers, we're appointed there because we're technically quite good, we're good at our jobs, we've been there a long time, rather than our ability to coach and lead. So this is something that really, really needs to be learned. And I think the really interesting thing about training people to have these coaching conversations is it's not just managers that we need to train. Because when I have done these shapes with whole teams, I've taught them to coach as well. And I've been very surprised that the thing that people have found the most helpful from all the tools that I give them is the coaching tool, because they say, you know what, we went off, we just had a 15-minute conversation each, and that was a really good conversation, and we realized that we could do this for each other. We don't need to involve the managers sometimes. So actually teaching peers to have these peer-to-peer conversations that produce transformation, as well as teaching managers how to have these coaching conversations that enable them to act as a coach rather than a rescuer is a really, really powerful way of getting this cultural change all the way through the organisation.
What else can organisations do to help people, for example, prioritise and manage their own workloads? If one of the challenges is that people have got a workload that is always greater than the available time, or that's how it feels. One thing is to set boundaries, another is to coach people. How else can people proactively manage their workload?
So I think that a very, very helpful tool that you can use is the prioritization grid. And this is the Eisenhower urgent important matrix. And it helps people we'll take a snapshot of everything they've got to do. And then you get people to put their daily tasks, or the things that crop up all the time, into one of 4 quadrants. You've got the urgent important quadrant, you've got the urgent not important quadrant, you've got your non-urgent but important, and your non-urgent and not important quadrants. And if you can do this for yourself, but it's really powerful if you do it with someone else. And we can train managers to do this with our direct reports, perhaps in a one-to-one. And you'll end up with lots and lots of tasks, probably in the urgent and the important matrix. And so helping people see that actually their lives can just be overtaken by the things that are urgent and the things that are important. And they never end up getting onto those things that aren't urgent, but are really, really important. And these are things like strategy, planning, working out what your processes are, being creative. So what we do is teach people how to use this grid. And because you can become overwhelmed with the urgent, important things, we ask people to work out actually what can they be proactive about to do to reduce that stuff going into their urgent, important box, because you have to do it now when it crops up. And often it's planning things in that big quadrant there, in the not urgent but the important quadrant. And that might be doing more regular staff one-to-ones, or working out better processes, or working out how we're going to run our meetings. And then, sorry, go on.
Well, it sounds like this could be a good tool for using in a coaching conversation as well.
Absolutely. And I think all these tools are part of a bigger coaching conversation. And then I think there is a conversation to be had between the managers and their teams, because actually the evidence is that 30 to 40% of our time at work is spent doing those things that aren't important. So we need to really delegate or get rid of that stuff that aren't important. And sometimes it's quite difficult to know what's not important. And this is where the coaching conversation with the manager can be really important. So what is it that I need to prioritize? What do I think I need to prioritize? Actually, what do you think I need to prioritize? What is it that I can drop? Because I think our problem is it's not that we're not really managing our time properly, it's that we've got too much to do and we're not able to prioritize it properly.
So we've looked at a few tools. We've got just under 10 minutes left, and if anybody has before we tackle our last topic, if anybody has a burning question for Rachel, do pop it into the chat, and if we've got time we'll pick it up in the call, and if not, I'm sure Rachel will help you with it afterwards. And Rachel, can we now home in on the really big question that we really started this webinar with, which is changes at an organisational level. Yeah. So what can you help us understand about making changes around the causes of stress at an organisational level that people can take away with them and use over the coming days and weeks?
So obviously we've talked about things that managers can do, with things that employees can do, but actually you need to change the organisation. And the first thing I would say is you need to work out actually what's going on that's causing stress. And there's lots of things that are just causing irritation for people. Processes, the fact that they've got too much demands, the fact that their role's not entirely clear. They might have stress because there's not a clear career progression through things. There might be difficult relationships. So sort of doing an audit of these 6 different categories and working out in your organisation what's working well, but actually what's not working so well, and what quick wins have you got that could start to change things, would be a really, really good way to start. So sort of doing a bit of an audit of this, chatting to your people, making sure you've got the lines of communication open, and then inviting people to input into the decisions. And you really need to deal with these process stuff, these things that are causing people stress and irritation. And often these are some of the sort of job dissatisfaction things. And I don't know if you've come across Hertzberg's motivation hygiene theory, but it basically says that the things that are causing people dissatisfaction and stress quite often are things like policy and administration, and their relationships and their work conditions and their salaries, etc., etc. But if you get these things right, you don't actually get job satisfaction, you just get absence of job dissatisfaction. You also need to look at other things such as achievement and recognition. The work itself needs to be interesting, and you need to have a feeling of autonomy and responsibility and advancement and growth. So I think even if organisations have checked through these different causes of stress and made sure that they're communicating well, that everyone has a crystal clear role and knows what to do, and they're resourced properly, if you're not making sure that people are motivated in the right way, then actually people are still going to get stressed, and they still might leave. So, you know, actually just making their jobs more interesting, getting people to job craft, so to actually look at what they're doing within their roles, working out what their strengths are, and working out what they can do that would really play to their strengths and skills, and help them be their best selves in their job is really, really important. And there's lots and lots of different motivation factors that we've already talked about. So autonomy and control, you know, being good at your work. So people might need some training and some upskilling. And then purpose, don't forget purpose in an organisation, really, really important. And to be able to grow and enjoy yourself. So there's lots of things that the organisation can do. I think making sure that you have got this common language throughout the organisation that upskills people, that helps people prioritise their work, that helps people listen to each other and coach each other. I think stopping some of the really irritating things like the culture of endless back-to-back meetings can be helpful. Stop the things that steal people's time, and stop them being able to focus on that really important but not urgent quadrant. So give them some flexibility about where they work, help them minimise disruptions and all those sorts of things. All can be really, really important. And as you were talking earlier, Carrie, you need to, senior leadership needs to set an example of not expecting instant answers to emails, and setting boundaries on their own work time, and constantly having conversations about priorities and workload.
And it sounds like some of the, especially some of the early slides about the business case for going beyond the wellbeing workshop might help people open up a conversation with the leadership team, with whom you would need some kind of dialogue and a plan to make some of this happen. And have you got any other recommendations for that? So how to talk to a leadership team that really doesn't want to talk about this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, you know, one way in is to look at the employee engagement survey, because often when people come to me and say, look, we need some resilience training in the organisation, it's on the basis of a survey that's been done and has just shown that people are really not engaged and people are really struggling. So I think, you know, if there is a toxic culture in an organisation, people are going to be they're going to have some problems, and it's getting people to realise what the problems are. So often saying, well, you know what, let's do a bit of an audit, let's do a workshop around the causes of stress and just hear from the people what's going on. That can often be quite powerful in actually flagging up what some of the issues are. And then just presenting some of the evidence to them about, you know, the well-being stuff. And I don't think it's that people don't know that it's an issue, it's that they don't really know what solution it's going to help, and they're a bit disillusioned by these very superficial things that they've seen in the past, or that they might have even tried themselves. Well, we tried this a year ago and nothing's happened. So, you know, what can we do?
So I'm just bringing together some of the threads, and it sounds like some of the systemic cultural changes that people can make are actually around some very simple things, like teaching people to listen better, teaching people to coach and spot other people as they head down the vortex of busyness, and give them some good conversations that they can have to bring them back up. Teach people how to proactively manage their workload by prioritising, and also how to spot when they're in that high stress response zone where their chimp is in charge and they're either rescuing, persecuting, or feeling like a victim. So quite a range of disarmingly simple tools in a way, but very powerful when used as an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've noticed, that you cannot just go in with one thing. You have to put lots of different interventions in. And working, you know, I would target the managers, because I think managers are right in the middle of the people and the organisation. And that is where real change can occur. So really focusing on empowering the managers to have these important conversations, and then actually getting getting a culture of openness, of communication, of empowerment going through, and making sure that people are regularly revisiting these and using them. And these shapes are just some of the tools that we use in organisations, and actually gives them tangible things to talk about and to work through. So, yeah.
And if people wanted to talk to you more, Rachel, or explore what you might be able to do with them, what should they do?
So I would love people to email me. I would love to have a phone call with them and have a chat about how we can best support your managers and your teams. One really simple way for getting more information from me would be to sign up to the Wild Monday Collective, which is my mailing list, and there's the links there on the screen. Also, there's a link on your invitation response to the webinar, so please sign up for that. And you'll, at the moment, we're giving out some shapes, one a week, handout of each of the shapes, so you can see much more information about that, and you'll also get access to some more resources and some things that I've been reading, and some information about events as well. And also, I would love to come and talk to your organisation. If you'd like to book a lunch and learn session, I'd love to come and just go through one or two of the shapes in a sort of lunchtime seminar for your organisation. So those 3 different things you can do: book a lunch and learn, you can join the World Money Collective, and you can just book a phone call with me to chat things through.
Dr. Rachel Morris, thank you so much for your insights today. You've been listening to the Wild Monday Collective webinar series. All the details, including references that Rachel made to texts and authors, plus all the links that she's shared, will be in the show notes below and also sent out by email. Rachel has 2 more webinars coming up, one this Wednesday and one next week. Please do join us for those, where we'll be tackling some of the other issues around addressing high stress situations at an organisational or team level. Rachel, many thanks.
Thank you, Kerry. Thanks everyone for being here. Bye-bye.